you'll never leave your country again. It's so true. Or is it? Will you actually get outside your country boundaries again? Will we actually be able to just have the normal get-togethers with, I don't know, friends, relations, people that are overseas? Well, it's the whole thing, I suppose, about this COVID-19, isn't it? It's about travel and all the restrictions that have been put on us in our own places, in our own countries, in our own towns and villages. But then when we come and think about our friends overseas or our family overseas or people we visited before, we kind of wonder, well, hold on a second, can I actually go overseas at all anymore or in the near future? So I'm looking at a study that comes from the effect of travel restrictions on the spread of the 2019 novel coronavirus, in brackets COVID-19 outbreak. And this was, covered by these wonderful type of authors who looked at it really speedily, really quickly. And with that in mind, it's really important for us to kind of look at, I suppose, not just the speed of travel, but in the speed of getting back to normal type of travel, not just for business and commercial classes, but for your own personal life as well. Within that particular study, they noticed that, well, I suppose that international travel restrictions and reduction in travel was going to occur. And of course this happened in 2020, soon as we hit the European borderlines, we hit Americas and stuff, we had all these stops put on travel. So starting in early February 2020, believe it or not, 59 airline companies suspended or limited flights to mainland China. And several countries, including the United States, Russia, Australia and Italy, had imposed at that stage government issued travel restrictions. Now this sounds really, really intimidating, really, and if you think about it, just even as I say it, I think about it, restrictions by any particular government is just really, it's really weird, but this is exactly what has happened in the last few months for people. And it was difficult to calculate back then exactly the level of traffic reduction that would be imposed by these measures. And it was for that reason that we, and I suppose the authors of this particular study, analysed more so two major scenarios in which international travel restrictions produce a 40 and 90% overall traffic reduction to and from mainland China. See, by the 23rd of January 2020, when all things were going ablaze as such, when this whole spread of the virus was occurring, the pandemic had already spread to other cities within mainland China, so it wasn't just in Wuhan itself. The travel quarantine around Wuhan, China, had only modestly delayed the spread of the disease to other areas of mainland China. Now they found this to be consistent with the results of several studies that were done in and around that time. And this was to do, I suppose, with the SARS-CoV-2 virus in mainland China. So, although there was an actual travel ban that was initially effective within China at reducing all this international case importations of people and people that had the disease, the actual number of imported cases outside of the main part of China actually continued to grow for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now we all know all of this, but what has it to do with the actual eventuality of our travel, you're wondering? I'm getting to that. It's really important, I suppose, to just sow a seed with regard to what has happened in the last while so that we can begin to wonder what's going to go on in the future. So as well as all of this modelling, the study showed that the additional travel limitations, which was up to 90%, believe it or not, of the regular travel traffic in the air at that time, had only modest effects unless it was paired with public health interventions. Now that's really, really interesting. But not just public health interventions, but also behavioural changes. And that goes down to the individual, it goes down to people themselves. This is what was found in the initial couple of weeks of the virus in China. So you can just imagine or begin to imagine what it's going to do to affect your life, to affect our restrictions on travel, not just in early 2020 or mid 2020, but in late 2020, 2021 and so on. I mean, if you think about it for a second and go back to 2001, when 9/11 occurred in the United States, there was all these kind of fears that were banded about particular people, particular types of people, cultures, terrorism and so on. I can remember myself back then having a friend with a beard and long hair, and you know what, he liked to travel. In fact, he was living overseas, but he got stopped at an airport, and he was the most peace-loving guy. He just happened to have long hair and a big beard. So if we just cast our minds back to 2001, 9/11 and all the things that happened right then and thereafter, even the movies, there was all these movies about kind of air traffic control, and there was all this thinking behind what's going to go on with regard to, well, I suppose travel within not just airports but on planes itself. And again, as I said, this was reflected in the movies and in the scenes that were in movies, even if they were like romance movies or comedies of sorts. There's always this bit of tragedy thrown in about the airports and about travelling and so on. There's all this thing about aerosol cans as well, and the lack of being able to bring on even toe clippers or nail clippers on board. This all came in after 2001. So what's going to happen with the air travel right now? So if we look at that initial study, we can see that the model also indicated, the model that they had in the study also indicated that despite the strong restrictions on travel to and from actual mainland China, that from January really 2020, there was actually many individuals still exposed to SARS-CoV-2. And this is not just with regard, like when we think about it, it's not just with regard to, of course, China. It's regard to commerce, to personal travel, to holidaying in the future. And remember, SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 and so on, all of this is to do with a virus. And the virus came from, well, how it came from. And with that in mind, we have to realise that the future viruses that can come out. So air travel control is all dependent on our behavioural change. Even Warren Buffett, the legendary American investor, had sold his firm's central holdings in the 4 major US airlines in early to, well, almost mid-2020, warning that he reckoned the world has changed. And even though he knew he was going to actually lose out on this, he also realised that now was a really good time to actually, well, sell his shares and stocks and so on in airlines, because he wanted to, well, not lose enough money. He reckoned that in the future, air travel is going to be pretty poor. So it's from here that we have to start looking at things and wondering, where is it we're going to go with air travel and how are we going to shape our lives around it? But as I said, there's all these behavioural changes. And with this in mind and behavioural changes in mind, we have to look down to the individual human. And that's you, that's me. And how would we react considering this, that and the other? How would we react if we knew there was somebody with a virus around us? So what is the actual future of airlines? You see, the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic has really hit, as I said, the whole commercial aviation. And it's hard to see this projected, well, time spent that's going to be on airlines. The future, according to what we're told, is going to involve touchless cabins. Yes, touchless cabins. What is touchless cabins? Oh, really? And check-in terminals. Now, okay, we've had check-in, well, terminals to a certain degree online because people can check in before they actually get to the airport. But touchless cabins, you see, they reckon that there's going to be seat back pockets which will be left empty, and there will be, well, touchless kiosks as such. And these will enable people to scan via like a code or even through voice commands. So I suppose technology is going to play a big, big role in the future with regards to air travel. And even Abu Dhabi, by the middle of 2020, were reporting that they were trialing these touchless check-in kiosks, and they even had passengers scanning for basic help and direct them towards their actual screening. So you can see how this is really going to change even the personality and the atmosphere behind traveling. I mean, if you think about it, it's difficult enough if you're going to an airport in the first place and you have to wait for 2 or 3 hours between flights, or maybe more. It's at the very least usually 2 or 3 hours, because let's face it, you have to go through a terminal, you have to queue, you have to eat. Look at all the things you're handling when you're eating, the trays. Are we going to have gloves? So there's all these different things that are going to change. But if you take out the personality, the atmosphere and people within those few hours, even just the people watching, would it be as nice to people watch for a few hours, for like 5 hours in the middle of the night? If you think about it, I remember being in the middle of the night, 4 and 5 a.m. I was so tired, traveling from Asia to Europe, that I'm shattered. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to even read a book. I just wanted to people watch and just chill out. So if you think about it, with all these restrictions, what's going to happen? In-flight janitors, I mean, come on. But yes, this is actually what is being proposed with regard to this behavioural change. Behavioural change is a tricky thing, but at the end of the day, it's down to, of course, the safety of the pilot, the safety of the plane. That's up to the greatness of these engineers we have, thankfully, but also our individual passengers, and that's you and me, isn't it? So how can we perhaps become safer as we fly? Fear is a huge thing. Anxiety around flying is massive. Anxiety around flying is always massive anyway, when you think about it. The very notion of actually going up in a plane is just crazy, isn't it? Because you're up in a plane and you're looking down on perhaps land, water, or even clouds. We've all been there. If we're lucky enough to get a window seat, it can be brilliant when we're taking off or landing, but it can be kind of like big, pardon the pun, because we're high up in the sky, high up in the air, and it's tough. So like doing this and just trying to imagine the future is going to be tricky, but it will change for sure. So I suppose it's about lessening the fear and maximizing our own behavioral change. So whatever you think you can do to make it safer for you, for me, make it less fearful and, let's face it, more pleasurable, well then it's going to be better, isn't it? And like, who wants to actually fly in the first place if it's not going to be pleasurable? If you have 2 weeks off and you have your 2-week annual vacation and you want to go away, perhaps, well, in general, it's more expensive to go away further, isn't it? So by going far away, you're going to pay more. If you're going to have a good quantity of time, like up to a day traveling to and then like a day traveling back, you want more pleasure. And pleasure in travel is like people. It's about interaction. It's about looking and seeing things. It's about experiencing things. And if we're all in this systematic thing where it's not pleasurable, it's just about routinely getting from A to B all around the world in a very regimental manner, how pleasurable is that? But I suppose we as individuals, we need to just adapt to that. And this is what we've been doing throughout COVID-19. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day.